Hello and welcome to this special podcast where today we are looking at being a councillor, what it means to be a councillor, what they do and why the upcoming elections are so important. My name's Roy Baston and my guest today is Barbara Murray. She is a councillor for the Yew ward within the constituency of West Derby. Welcome, Barbara.
Hello, Roy. It's lovely to be here.
Well, that's the question. I've just mentioned there about what it is. What does it mean to be a councillor? I suppose I've got to ask that question for you. So a lot of people say, what are councillors? What does it mean to be a councillor?
There's quite a few hats to wear when you're a councillor. I think most people would be aware of the practical hat, if you like, which is the one in the community, having good lights, good streets, road surfaces, no dog fouling, no litter, no fly tipping. And then there's the sort of hidden hat, if you like, which is all the committees, the meetings, the deciding of budgets, the planning, the real power, I guess, and influence of being a councillor within the council, working with officers to get those other things in place to be practical.
Right. Could you define the difference between a councillor and an MP? So a lot of people may not give that too much thought, but what is the difference?
There's a huge difference, and most people do not know the difference. An MP is elected for a much bigger area than a councillor, and their job is legislative, which is they make laws, they change laws, they debate possible changes to law, whereas a councillor is very much on the ground in a smaller area, a ward. So, for example, West Derby ward, like all the wards in Liverpool, has West Derby constituency, like all the constituencies in Liverpool, has 6 wards in it. And in each of those wards, there are currently 3 councillors. And I think in Yew ward, we currently have about 8,500 people to look after. Right. But when I say look after people, I mean not about changing the law in their lives, about keeping their streets clean, about making sure they've got good services from the council, the bins get emptied, the weeds are sprayed, everything is kept tidy.
Things people take for granted.
And so if you think about it, it's so very, very different to the role of an MP, who is more about thinking about what laws are needed, what changes are needed to law. So, for example, a very big debate that's gone on for very many years in this country is whether or not to bring back hanging. That's not a councillor's domain. Yeah. That is very much the domain of the MPs in the House of Commons and then the House of Lords. You know, those people are looking at those kind of bigger issues.
Right. There's a lot going on there. You mentioned a lot of hats, a lot of involvements here. So why did you, Barbara Murray, want to become Councillor Barbara Murray?
Well, it was a very strange journey, if you like. I've always been in the Labour Party since I was very young, and I've always done things like leafleting and attending meetings, and I've been the chair of the constituency and the chair of the ward and that sort of thing. But it was in my role as a teacher that I first started to think about this. It was at the time of the Blair government, a Labour government. A lot of money was getting devolved into education, but I couldn't literally see it coming to the chalk face as a teacher here in Liverpool. And at that time, the leader of the Labour group had a meeting in the town hall to encourage more women to come into politics as councillors. So I sat and I listened to him and I went home and thought about it. And I stood 3 times, I think, before I got elected. And eventually I did get elected. I got elected to Yew ward, which was quite new to me because Liverpool East, I live in South Liverpool, was a whole new area of the city to me. Yeah. Previously I'd stood, I think it was one of the wards I stood in was Garston going back and maybe Egbert. I know because all the names have changed since then. But going up to Liverpool East was illuminating and very interesting because I didn't know that part of the world. Right. And so it was a big learning curve, but useful because you have to know the people you're representing and every brick really and every tree in the ward to do a good job.
And it's 16 years. If
16
you
years.
Get elected again in the elections, That'd be 20 years. I would imagine
Yeah.
you've probably seen quite a bit of change in that time, pal.
At one level, lots of change. At another level, some things just aren't changing quick enough.
Right.
One of the sad things for me, and probably for the whole Labour group, was I got elected in 2007, and it was quite an intake that year of women, which was great. And for a long time, Liverpool did have virtually 50% women, which is a good record. But at that time, we were not in power in the city. We were still the opposition. And then when we did come into power in the city, the government changed. So we went from a Labour government to a Conservative government, and austerity started. So pretty much from the day we became the leading group, we had to start cutting the very things that we wanted more of. So that has been the history of my time in the council, if you like.
Well, let me ask you what that was like, because austerity is, it's a horrible word when you consider how it's affected on people's lives. From your point of view, having to tell people that certain things are just not going to be as they were before, and your hands are tied, effectively. This is coming from up on high. But what was that like for you, having to do that?
It wasn't good, and I think personally it was something we had to learn to do as well. Pretty much everybody involved in budget, whether they're officers or councillors, needs to understand how to manage a budget. And, you don't automatically know how to do these things. And for me, there were red lines. So, for example, in other areas of the country, libraries closed, children's centres closed, leisure centres closed. And here in Liverpool, I think we did something remarkable, really. We just said, no, these are the red lines. We're not closing these. We'll cut elsewhere. And, for example, we lost, I think it was 350 million overnight on the promised Building Schools for the Future programme for Liverpool. And I have to hats off to Joe Anderson, the then mayor, because, he ensured that we still got new schools and refurbished schools, and we just had to try and find the funding elsewhere. I thought that was a remarkable achievement under the circumstances. But time marches on, and it's been, for the full, pretty much, duration of the time I've been a councillor, about cuts. And you get to a certain point where, people just talk about the hanging fruit, didn't they? And, cutting the flesh but not the bone. Well, we're past cutting the bone now, basically. You can only go so far down this route before you start to notice that services aren't as good as they were. Now, this year is a very interesting year for the budget. We thought we'd set a good budget. When I say a good budget, a sound budget last March. A budget that would follow through. And then we were told mid-year that we needed to cut another 78 million out of this year.
78 million. 78
million out of this year. And you looked at it, and things on the table were things like the support we give to people to pay their rent, our maximisation of benefits team, all the services that we've put in place over the years to support the poorest people in our community. And this is a piece of nonsense, and we stood our ground on this. If you take those things out of the equation, at the time that the whole country has experienced cost of living and an energy crisis, it's just madness, isn't it? So we stood our ground, and we've protected those. And then, as it happened, and as it does happen with budget, and this is the strangest thing about it, bits of money started coming in from other places.
All right.
And so it was reduced, that the amount we had to cut was reduced, and thereby we knew exactly what we wanted to save. We'd already said we're not cutting those things, so they were saved first. And we still do have, as you know, libraries, children's centres and leisure centres going forward. Don't get me wrong. We set the budget the 1st of March last week, or the week before, and the new leader of the Labour group said at that meeting, And tomorrow we start budgeting next year. And this is what I mean when I say you have to understand how budgets work. What we hadn't been doing in Liverpool was that piece of work from the day after we set one budget on the next year's budget. Because it's a full year's work to get it right.
Yeah.
There is so much involved and so many different things you have to be aware of all at once and how they fit together. So that's what we're doing now, looking at 24-25 budget. Is that right? No, 23-24 and 24-25. And looking longer term, if you like. It's not good to just be constantly looking in year at the budget you're actually experiencing. You've got to try and see how you can smooth those cuts so they're not so seriously deep at any given point.
From your point of view then, and from your colleagues' point of view, this is a never-ending workload because it's not something, that you can just, I'll put a couple of hours aside on a Tuesday night to work these things out. This is, if you're going to be a councillor, you're in it for the long haul. You can, to a certain degree, write a big proportion of your social life off.
Well, I would say it's a 24/7 commitment. Right. I'm not saying you work 24/7, obviously, but you can be called upon 24/7. Things happen. I mean, things like, I know very early on when I was a councillor, we had really serious floods in my ward and families were devastated. We had to be there for them, to support them. It was a learning curve for us. We didn't know what to do. We had to try and find ways to help them. So there's that kind of sudden thing I've noticed there today in the news. There's been a gas explosion in Swansea and the damage that's caused. You don't just say, well, who's going to help them?
Yeah.
Your front line really is your councillors with your services because you've got to support your community. By the same token, there are other things which are more day-to-day, that you can sort of box off. I have to keep a very tight diary to fit in all my meetings, and then I do other things in between that diary. It's strange.
I know what you like about it.
You have to prioritise. And for me, it always seems to be the nice stuff has to give way for the stuff I have to do, because literally when you are in charge of the city, which is what councillors are, you have to take it very seriously and you have to be there to deal with that matter before everything else.
Well, let me pick up on that because, you just mentioned obvious things there, something like, a natural disaster, floods, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, you would expect the councillor needing to be there. But what about the things that people don't know that you're involved? Because, there's so many things under the surface that perhaps maybe people think, well, I never even thought of that. Can you give us an example?
There's many, many examples. I call them the hidden work, really, because if you're walking up and down the streets delivering leaflets or just checking to see they're clean, people see you, but they don't see you in meetings. There are public meetings, but the vast majority of meetings for council are not in public. Therefore, it's not that they're private meetings, they're just not seen, and people aren't always aware of the types of work we do. So, for example, we were talking earlier and I talked to you about chairing Liverpool SACRE. The SACRE stands for the Standing Advisory Council for Religious Education. Now, that's a statutory requirement on every local authority to ensure RE is taught in schools properly and to a good standard, but they also have the responsibility of developing the syllabus and they have to refresh that every 3 to 4 years. We've just done that again in Liverpool. I've done that twice now on my tenure. Nobody knows anything really about this, but it's there in the background. RE teachers will know about it. People in education will know about it. But those kind of jobs have to be done. They're requirements by law, Another piece of work I do you might not be aware of is I've been leading on setting up apprenticeships for youth workers in the city. And that was a strange one because if you go back to that point about the cuts, Roy, our youth provision in the city has been cut to the bone. There is a requirement, a statutory requirement to have youth provision, but you can tick it by literally putting a football match on over there.
Really?
Yeah. Whereas what we need is we need a proper, a proper service which has outreach youth workers, which has youth centres, which has well-trained staff to look after our young people and to help them to make good choices in their lives, to help them if they need signpost into a service or if they need support, to help them, full stop, to be rounded young people. The school can't do all of that. No. There's an awful lot more that needs to be done. So having identified some years ago now with a guy called Matt Parrish, who had just come to Liverpool FC Foundation to start working in the community, we talked about this gap because there are vacancies in youth services, but we can't fill them. Because of the cuts over the years, there are no longer any youth workers to fill the jobs. So we came up with this notion of an apprenticeship, mainly because, and you've, like many other people, have probably heard of this, something called the apprenticeship levy, which was getting underspent. It was millions of pounds coming from government to train apprentices, but they wouldn't pay the wages. So unless you had somebody who was already in a job, you couldn't really spend apprenticeship levy on them. So we decided to set up a training scheme for a cohort of 8 young people where we placed them in community settings, paid them their wages, and then we pulled down the levy to pay for their training. Well, it took us nearly 2 years to get the money to pay the wages, which was $250,000 we needed because we wanted to pay a living wage.
Yeah.
And we are now just coming to the end of that second year of that first cohort. And the great news is, because we were looking around, we wanted progression for them. We wanted them to go to degree level if possible. But there was no degree to be had. The nearest place to Liverpool you could do a degree in youth work was Bolton.
Oh, right.
So, anyway, the good news is Hope University have reintroduced, because they used to do it years ago, have just reintroduced, starting this September, a degree, a Bachelor of Arts, for community and youth workers, and having talks with them, which again, you don't see this stuff, this just goes on behind closed doors, about our cohort. They are looking seriously at being able to offer a part-time degree for youth workers who are in place working somewhere, which is probably better all round because they get some wages and they study at the same time. So that's going on. And, basically for that, we're trying desperately now to raise the money for the wages for the next cohort. Because, the council has no money.
Yeah.
And it's about where do you go to get the money to do these good works. Incredible. And all the time you're doing things differently and trying to think creatively. But that to me is a good example of something you wouldn't know about. I have just sent an email to some politicians to invite them in to see a presentation about that, because it's about time we got some support at a high level.
The other thing, conversations that you and I have had before, is about the skill shortage. You just mentioned it there within that, and that was just a few examples. But is it right across the board? Are we talking about some incredible work that could come to the city that we can't get because there is a skill shortage?
The work is already here. And the comparison I always make is, and I think we're old enough to remember, in the 80s in Liverpool, you were told to get on your bike and find a job.
Norman Sevis.
Leave the city, because there were no jobs in Liverpool, basically. There was nothing to be had. That has completely changed. There are fabulous jobs here now. We just can't fill them. Wow. And, the danger of that is if you don't start filling those jobs, the people offering those jobs will start going elsewhere. Yeah. But for me, it's far more important we fill those jobs because they are better jobs, better paid jobs. And this is the way you come out of poverty, by getting better paid for the work you do. And, that connects them, if we work backwards, to coming out of education with better skills. But as you know, for me, one of the big skills shortages is literacy. And that's why we set up something called the literacy cycle, which is very much in everybody's face. There's nothing hidden about that. Because we're just saying, whether you're in school still as a child learning, or whether you're an adult looking for a job, or whether you're an adult in a job, we can always be better at those things. Those literacy skills are so crucial to getting the better paid jobs. They also are crucial to having that kind of satisfaction. You know, if you become a writer or you find your work in the creative industries, these are real possibilities now. And, you know, these are routes into work. So we have to be really serious about upskilling everybody who lives here. It was interesting on International Women's Day that the theme was equity. And to me, we sat and we discussed it, and we were over in the Novotel, up in the Knowledge Quarter, and everyone was scratching their heads because it's difficult sometimes to work out the difference between equality and equity. But what we thought it came down to is equality is everything the same. Well, do you know what? There is no such thing. Equity is about looking across the piece and seeing, oh, that person there needs a bit more help to get to there, and that one needs less. But equity is about it's the levelling up agenda, if you like, that the government talks about. And that's what equity is. But skills, to my mind, sit along that line. And I don't care who you are. I mean, including myself here, you know. Even at my age, you can improve your skills. You can actually take on new skills. As you know, I've been sitting on your radio show once a week. You know, that's a new
skills from me.
that's a new experience for me. And we produced a book over the Christmas, New Year. I've never done that before. So we're never too old to learn. And interestingly, in the Labour Party manifesto this year, you know, we are really serious about lifelong learning. And it has to be lifelong learning. But most crucially important, it's those very early years where you get the good grounding. You know, we don't want any children leaving school who can't read. It's just, you've got to get the early years right. And then it opens up people's lives. We know when we look at the data, it just happens to be the case that the better educated you are, the better opportunities you get for work. But you also seem to be better able to look after your own health. There are so many factors. And so politically, when you look at it, you think, yes, any money spent is best spent early on here, because then we have to spend less further down the road and less on old age and looking after people in old age, because hopefully they will be, it's a great investment, they will be healthier as they get older and better able to look after themselves with a good pension and that kind of thing.
Got to ask you a completely different subject here. Last year was it saw some very unfortunate events in Liverpool, shone perhaps maybe an unwelcome spotlight. What would you say to people looking from the outside at Merseyside and with these things? Is there anything you can say that people could be reassured that this is the exception, not the norm?
I think it is very difficult. I think whenever a young person loses their life, it is tremendously difficult for that family. And we literally have, don't we, that expression, how awful it would be to lose a child. I was watching the father of the girl from Wallasey who was murdered at Christmas time this week, and he's walking and he's doing something to try and keep his own mental health, if you like. And so I think, I suppose there may be some, but I'm sure very few people who are so callous and hard-hearted not to understand that kind of loss. And I think we all understand that. But then we have to unpick and question what has happened. Now, my view is Liverpool got a very bad press around those events, and there have been several, I'd say, in the last 18 months.
You were actually called upon to kind of...
One of those was in my ward, so we felt it very closely.
Well, media, you were saying, you know.
Yeah, and it is literally a media circus that turns up. Not really what you want immediately after something like that. But you also have a massive police presence. And I felt for our community as much as I felt for the family, really, because it's an invasion. But also, too, I don't think anybody would not have felt for what happened there.
Sure.
It was such a set of random events. I don't think we could have mitigated against them. Some people would say it was the police cuts, this, that and the other. I don't know. I just think the events were so dreadful. And I don't know what you could have done. Even if you'd had a policeman on the corner, I don't know. Yeah. But that's why I would come back and say about the youth work. I think having youth work and that early investment in young people, crucially, would maybe turn some of our young people away from crime and guns. A look at guns and knives, and they've become quite the norm, haven't they? Yeah. In some ways. I mean, London in particular, with the knives, is striking. It's every single week something terrible happens. But from our point of view, I would say Liverpool, despite the cuts, is doing quite well in terms of what are the measures you would normally measure. I've just said to you, there are jobs here. Yeah. It could be, with some more investment, a thriving place to live. The town's looking tidy. The waterfront looks spectacular on a sunny day when you've got the liners coming in. It's as good as any port in the world. Absolutely. It's beautiful. And it's about making sure, therefore, that our streets are safe. And what I would say is our understanding is, in the night economy, that Liverpool is one of the safest cities in the country. Yeah, absolutely. And I know people mightn't like this fact, but with respect to gun crime, we were literally at our lowest point for 20 years. But that doesn't bring back people who've been murdered. But we have to, as a politician, we have to look at the trends as well. And they are the hopeful points, if you like. So that's why, for me, around those facts, bringing back a well-trained youth service to support our young people is now crucial.
Well, this is the thing, you can talk about solving a problem, but this is a long game.
Oh,
and
yes.
Those investments in skills will eventually pay dividends. But you've got to wait. It's no good thinking, well, we've got to save money now, we've got to do it. You've got to look ahead to the future, because the future could be so much better as a result of that relatively small investment when you look at the return that you get from it.
Absolutely, Roy. And that's what I think. I mean, against this as well, I think we have to look really closely at what's coming through. For Liverpool, before the pandemic, school attendance was the worst probably in the country. And I think across the country we were seeing mental health of children in decline, which was unexpected and I think took a lot of people by surprise. Unfortunately, the pandemic has made those issues worse. And now these are absolutely crucial issues. It's about time we started investing in our children. And not just, I'm really big on children getting the best education possible and the best outcomes. But I don't think we can keep asking the schools and the teachers in the schools to be doing all of the jobs.
Yeah, sure.
But I do believe that schools are in our community, they're part of our community, and those buildings could be used for longer hours with different sets of professionals operating in and out of them. So I just think we have to look at things differently, and we just have to come up with better solutions. But we need to put, and I had this mantra for very many years, I've been a governor in lots of schools, I've also been the cabinet member for education, and I've only ever had the one mantra, and you've never heard this, have you? The children is at the centre of everything we do. Yeah. And when I used to say it as a governor, what I meant was, I'm not here to protect jobs of teachers. I'm not here for this building. I'm here to make sure that child gets the very, very best education and is well looked after, feels safe, etc. And why do I say that? Because we're the adults. We're in charge of what happens. And if our children are going off the rails and turning to gun and knife crime, well, look no further. You know, I love the African phrase, Ubuntu. It takes a village to raise a child. Yeah. We all have to play a role, and I don't care if you haven't even got children. We're all involved in this together because we're all involved in the consequences and the fallout if it goes wrong. We all have to take responsibility, and that's where I start.
Yeah. It's going to be quite different. This election is going to be quite different, I'm led to believe, in a few ways, not least for the fact that you will need to produce some photo ID to vote in the first place. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, this is Liverpool, isn't it? And Liverpool is doing things differently again. We've had commissioners in and we've been told we have to change a lot of things. So we have to go to all-out elections every 4 years. And this year, when you go to those all-out local elections, you need to bring with you either a passport, driving licence, or if you have a national bus pass. And I have to stress, if we are very lucky here on Merseyside, we can get a bus pass at 60, but it's from Mersey Travel. You don't actually get a national bus pass until you get pension, state pension. You cannot use that local Mersey Rail bus pass in the election, so it has to be a national one. And there's various other things you can use. But if you haven't got those, you have to apply for something called a certificate of authority to vote. And if you go online, you can do that. And I'm sure there'll be an awful lot of information about that and forthcoming. The importance of these elections for me, and I would say that because I'm in the Labour Party, is that if in Liverpool we keep a Labour council, I think most people know, and that will be then for 4 years. In the next 18 months, there will be an election for a Labour government, in my opinion. Wow. And I would love to see, and this to me is the great importance, a Labour government with a Labour council, so that we can be the change that we've just been discussing, that early investment, that caring for the child in all aspects. And that trying to make communities where we all feel safe and prosper and thrive, nice, green, clean communities, And some people might be cynical, but I'm at an age where I think, well, since I became a councillor, I've only ever been in a position of having to cut services to people, cut the money on behalf of the government. And although we have protected certain things, children's centres, libraries, leisure centres, it would be wonderful to work with a government that has the same principles as I do, and who would be keen to put the children at the centre of everything we do. Because, if we put the children at the centre of everything we do, in 60 years from now, we're looking at a new world.
To be a better place, wouldn't it? Barbara, it's been wonderful speaking to you. I know how passionate you are about your politics now, how much of a difference you want to make, not only to the area that you represent, but how you'd like to see that be a national thing, and hopefully it will be the case, it will come to pass. So the elections are happening on the 4th of March, 4th of May, I do apologise, 4th of May. And if people want to get more detail about the Labour Party and how the Labour Party can help them, and they can find out more about what it is that they are voting for, what's the resource, what do they do?
Well, it's straightforward because we will be going out there to people with our leaflets, door knocking, those sort of things. We're launching our manifesto this Friday, the 17th of March, St Patrick's Day. But you can always go onto the Labour Party website, just Google Labour Party, and it'll shoot up and you can see everything there. But, the important thing to me, and I've always said this, is please go out and vote. Even if you don't vote for Labour, I would rather you vote than just ignore it. Everyone's got a voice. We're lucky to have a voice to be able to vote. And I really do hope you will consider voting Labour. We've had a difficult period in charge in the city, but we have worked hard to try and maintain those services for the people who are most in need. And I suppose unless you are the most in need, you might not be aware of that. But that's what we have managed to do. And I'm proud of our record in protecting the poorest and the most vulnerable. Having said that, I would really love the opportunity to be able to do a lot more if we had more money to spend.
Well, who knows? Councillor Barbara Murray, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us.
Thank you, Roy. It's been my pleasure.